So glad to be here today. It really is an honor to be here. I do want to just acknowledge Pastor Peter and Tiffany are an incredible couple. I just count them as friends. I think you are incredibly privileged to have them as a pastor of your church. Love Pastor Justin and Amanda, his wife, incredible people. I'm excited by what God's doing here at Hope City. And when Peter asked me to come, I was honored to come. It seems like I brought a little bit cooler weather with me, which I think just travels. And again, I said this last time I was here. On behalf of everyone who comes from the north and destroys your paradise, I apologize. I know you're bracing. That comes with the nicer weather. You're kind of like, oh, that means all those people from up north are coming back. So I apologize on behalf of all those people. So glad to be here today. We're launching a brand new series called Backyard Gospel. And I'm excited for this series because this really is that time of year in this part of the world where people come outdoors again, right? Like you've been living in air conditioning for months, and now is the time that you can finally get back outside and enjoy that nice lanai you have, and maybe see your next door neighbors. Even just yesterday, we were backyard at Peter's place, and we were talking to his next door neighbor. Haven't seen him in months. He's been hidden away somewhere, just in and out of the garage, in the car, all of that. Super excited to be here today. And one of the reasons why I love the backyard is the grill. A chance to get out and grill. Any grill masters here today? People that are like, they just love grilling. Okay, a couple. That's great. Appreciate that. When I was a kid, my dad did all the grilling at our house. In fact, actually, it's kind of still the case. But particularly when I was a kid, I did all the grilling, and I actually did not like anything that came off the barbecue because I did not realize, but everything that came from the grill that my dad cooked, and hopefully he's not watching this, it always came a little shriveled up, a little bit burnt and really dry and you had to double chew the hamburgers. It was pretty intense. But actually one day my dad was late coming home. My mom has never used the grill in her entire life. I don't know, is that like that in your household where again my mom, she just says she does not know how to use it, and so it was always my dad's job. But then one day I was late, or my dad was late coming home, and so she said to me, Ricky, that's what I went by as a kid, little Ricky, apologize for that. Now go by Rich. If you call me Ricky, we will not be friends. But she said to me, Ricky, can you go out and try to do the barbecue? Now, I had stood with my dad sometimes and done that and watched how he had made the burnt sacrifice. So I knew how to do this, but then what I figured out is you don't actually have to burn things. You can actually cook them nicely and then take them off in time. And so actually ever since that day, whenever I'm at my mom's house, and even to this day at our house, my mom's like, hey, could you barbecue? Or my wife even could you barbecue? I just love using the grill. And so ever since that, I've been a grilling machine. That's why I am excited about the kickoff of Backyard Gospel, today's series that we're talking about. Now even though that's kind of a funny reminder at this time of year, we get to see our next door neighbors. Maybe we've got some block parties coming up in your part of the world, or maybe you're going to finally head down to the beach after the red tide passes. You can let your hair down, catch up with friends that you maybe haven't seen in a while. But I'm hoping that this time of year, that reminds you when you're out and about, when you're getting a chance to see people in your neighborhood, that reminds you and me that you and I are put in strategic relationships with the people next door to us, the people in our neighborhood who really need to know Jesus. I want you to think for a moment, who are the people in your world that, man, you would love to see them take steps closer to Christ? Maybe it's your next door neighbor, literally the person who lives next door to them, or maybe it's a friend from work, or maybe it's your hairdresser, or maybe it's a relationship from years gone by. Who is that person? And today I want you to be thinking about them, thinking about that person that you would love to see take steps closer to Christ. You see, Backyard Gospel, this series is really a series about personal evangelism. That's such a weird word, evangelism. What does that mean? It's like a word from a bygone area. All it really means is to share the good news of what Jesus has done in your life. Literally, that's what evangelism is telling other people what it means, what Jesus has impacted you. That's what we're talking about for these next few weeks. And what we're hoping to do is to talk about it in a way that doesn't seem weird or strange, That ultimately, that the gospel of Jesus and your life should pair as well as the burgers and Bible. It should be, just a really natural part of your life. In fact, it's interesting when you look at the New Testament. Oftentimes, because we're going to talk about food and different kinds of things like that through the series, kind of leveraging off that theme. Oftentimes, you see Jesus as he's walking around in his time. It seemed like he was always talking about food. He was always using examples from kind of the food world. He talked about having faith like a mustard seed. I heard a thing about Pastor Justin, which to me was disturbing. That he, with chips, likes mustard. That is crazy. But Jesus, he actually talked about having faith like a mustard seed. I don't know if that has to do with anything except to just disturb me a little bit. Or, you've heard about that story of Jesus. There was a small man, a tax collector, who was up in a tree, and he called out to him. His name was Zacchaeus. And what did Jesus do? He invited him to a dinner party. He said, hey, I'm getting together with some friends. And they ended up having, dinner together. Or, in fact, actually, another part of Scripture, we see that Jesus had the reputation of one who ate and drank. He actually was kind of known as a little bit of a partier, was kind of always hanging out with people. And I think that's an interesting thing for us to pick up on, that actually Jesus lived and seemed to proclaim his message in the everydayness of life. That although he did proclaim in, the synagogue, he did proclaim in religious places, actually more than often we see him interacting with people in the normalness of life, in the backyard of his life. And so this series, what we want to do is to give you some tools, some helpful hints on how you can present the message of what Jesus has done in your life to other people in just very real scenarios. We want it to seem natural. We want to follow Jesus' pattern, which is when we think about Jesus and sharing our faith with others, we often think about, maybe something that's less natural. And in fact, we often think about that guy. Maybe you're having a party in your street. Maybe it's a block party. Maybe you live in a cul-de-sac and they've closed it down and everybody is coming together. And then there's always that guy, the guy who wears this t-shirt here. Some guy walks in with this t-shirt. Want a taco about Jesus? Let us pray. People who wear these t-shirts, and I think their heart's in the right place, but they're just strange. And hopefully you're not wearing a shirt like this today. But they're just bizarre. Or how about, this is the great thing about a guest communicator. You're like, you can say things that are offensive and then just leave. Or how about this great one right here, the fire extinguisher? But see, you're supposed to ask, why does that fire extinguisher have a cross on it? And then the person will jump on you and say well, let me tell you, because you're going to hell. And that's a funny way to start a conversation. Or how about this cleverness? This to me is the classic, the Lord's gym. Oh yeah, do you even lift, man? Nobody really wants to be that guy, that kind of strange guy. And so our hope is that this series will really push against being cheesy. We'll push against kind of the high-pressure sales tactics that are often thought about when we think about sharing our faith, when we think about talking to others about faith. There's this great book called I Was Once Lost, What Skeptics Taught Us About Their Path to Jesus. And the authors did this incredible thing. They actually went out and talked to 2,000 people who were once skeptical about Christ. And said, hey, tell us about your journey back to Jesus. What did that look like? And the whole book kind of summarizes and tries to kind of compress those stories down. And I love this interesting, it's a fascinating book. It's an interesting kind of look at what does it mean or how you could read it quite quickly. What does it look like for people to come back to Christ? And there's this interesting quote here on page 31 that goes like this. It says, in another day and age, God, religion, and church enjoyed the general respect of culture. Well, not today. Religion is suspect, church is weird, and Christians are hypocrites. Distrust has become the norm. People are tired of the sales tactics often employed by Christians and are offended by the bait and switch attempts to introduce them to Jesus. I really do think that's accurate. I think that describes the world that you live in and it describes the world that I live in. In fact, there's people in my own life who, I would describe this, a close relative named Jude in my world. He, in fact, actually was really involved in church at one point in his life. And, over time just became increasingly upset by how the church seems to, his perception, the church seemed to really try to divide who's in and who's out, was always seemed to be in the business of dividing rather than uniting, and in fact actually got to the point where that he just wanted nothing to do with it, and in fact walked away from it all. Or a friend of mine, Krista, who she and I, when we were young people, teenagers, we served together at a Christian camp, and we both were there, helping young kids come to know Jesus. And I just kind of got reacquainted with her. I haven't talked to her in years, probably 15, 20 years. I just got reacquainted with her recently. And it was kind of sad because, she got to the point in her life where Jesus just really wasn't relevant to her anymore. And in fact, it feels like a distant memory, like something she was involved in years ago. Or a friend, Rob, who has recently gone through a divorce, and unfortunately in his world, he has felt like, the judgment he has felt, even though I don't think it's been foisted on him, he has felt like there's a huge D written on his chest for divorced, and as if, from his perspective, feels like the church doesn't welcome him anymore. I'm sure you can think of people like that in your world, who for whatever reason are no longer or have never been connected to the things of Jesus. And this series, what we're hoping is that we can give you some practical tools to take steps towards Christ, to help those people take steps back towards Him. In fact, unfortunately, when people think about the things of Christ, instead of becoming relaxed, they become rigid. They see Christians, you and I, as self-righteous. They see us as narrow-minded and maybe just interested in pushing our particular point of view on the world. In fact, Jesus, the interesting thing about Jesus, when we see Him, when we read how He interacted with people in His day, He never acted holier than thou, even though He was. That wasn't His orientation to the world around Him. In fact, it seemed like He just found Himself naturally in conversation. He found Himself naturally engaged in what it means to tell others about Himself. And so today, during this series, we want to help you with that. Now, quick disclaimer. You may be here and you don't follow Jesus. In fact, you're already a little bit uncomfortable. You're like, why are we talking about this and why am I here today? First of all, we want to welcome you. We are so glad that you're here. Part of the reason why Hope City exists is we're hoping that people from a wide variety of faith backgrounds will be a part of our church. And if you're here today and you're still kind of checking out the things of Christ, welcome. We're glad you're here. Now, the next 3 weeks, what you're going to get is really an insider conversation. It's almost like you're coming to sit at a family table discussion about what it means to talk about Jesus. And we know that we sometimes get it wrong, and we're sorry. In fact, we know we sometimes kind of stink at it. And so our hope is that you'll come and get a chance to kind of sit alongside with us as we hopefully get better for you. And we would encourage you to be with us. So thank you so much for expressing patience with us as we try to wrestle with this. Because I truly believe that sharing the love of Christ should be as natural and as simple as having friends over in our backyard, as having people over to hang out. Think about it. What's the first thing that you say when someone comes to your house? Maybe they're going to hang out in your backyard. Maybe they're going to come for a swim or, have some nice, barbecue or something in your backyard. And I actually do think that the conversation that starts there is exactly the same conversation that we can have when we start thinking about what it means to invite others to Christ. What is the first thing you say? Often you say, hey, you want something to drink, right? Hey, do you want something to drink? Come on over. Do you want something to drink? Well, who wants something to drink today? Now, I know for me, what I love is the Arnold Palmer. The half and half. Does anybody love the Arnold Palmer? Here we go. Here's Arnold Palmer for you there. Sir, you want something to drink. That's great. And you need to open it. We want to hear you open it. There you go. Little Arnold Palmer. And in case, the thing about the Arnold Palmer is it also comes in the strawberry Arnold Palmer. These ladies over here, do you want an Arnold Palmer? Would you like that, ma'am? Thank you. An Arnold Palmer. Now, to me, the Arnold Palmer is like the perfect drink. So I've got one of my own here because I didn't want to give them all away. And this really is a perfect way to start off, because actually we're going to look if you've got your Bibles, I'd love for you to open them to the book of John, to chapter 4, because actually there we're going to see, and I need to take a sip here. Oh, some ice fell off it. Oh, that's nice and cold. Oh, that's good. One more sip. Whew. I'll put that there so you can see Arnie. Chapter 4 we're going to take a look at. Now, John, the book of John is a Greco-Roman biography. So it's in the New Testament. And it really tells the story of Jesus. It talks about really the kind of whole life of Christ and tells it really from one person's perspective. In fact, actually, the author of John was writing this book near the end of their life, and they were reflecting back on what it was like to see Jesus in his day. In fact, it's often considered that the book of John is actually one of the most up close and personal books in the New Testament of what it meant to follow Christ. It's actually fairly gritty at moments, and the author of John really reflected on the fact of the kind of love between Jesus and John particularly. And so today we're going to see a perfect example of that. And so we're going to look in chapter 4 today, and we're going to see one interaction and try to pattern our own conversations about what it means to talk to others about Christ through this particular passage. And we're going to start here in verse 4. So John 4:4, and let's take a look at this. Now, he, that's Jesus in this paragraph, had to go through Samaria. So he came down to a town in Samaria called Sychar, near the plot of ground Jacob had given to his son Joseph. So this is a piece of historical property, and there was a well there. Jacob's well was there, and Jesus was tired from his journey, so he sat down at the well. It was about the 6th hour. By our standards, that was like 12 noon. It was high noon. It was the hottest part of the day. Actually, what that means there is kind of 6 hours from sunrise. It was the highest part of the day. The sun was at its apex. Now I know it can get hot here. I know. But this was even hotter. This was in the Middle East. It's a hot time of the day. Jesus had been very tired. He was wearing his flip-flops, was probably dirty, was very, just a disorienting time of day. And so he sits down, and watch what happens next in verse 7. He says, when a Samaritan woman came to draw water, Jesus said to her. Now, let's just set this up for a moment before we jump on. So Samaritans, who were these people? These were the half-breeds of the day. Actually, the Jews and Samaritans, they never talked to each other. And so this was an opportunity for Jesus to interact with someone else. Well, what was the profound piece of wisdom? What was the amazing thing that he starts this conversation with? Let's look. What does it say? And let's all say it aloud for me. It says, will you give me a drink? Let's try that again. Will you give me a drink? Wow. Notice that Jesus doesn't start with, if you were to die tonight, or, let me take this track and give it to you, or, what are your views on this issue? He says, hey, do you got something to drink? Do you have a drink that you could give me? And this is the first step of evangelism that we want to point out today. And if you're taking notes, this would be a great first point to say. It's really this. It's ask good questions. It's really not rocket science here or high-level, high-minded theology. It really just starts with great questions. The first steps in sharing the good news of Jesus, of sharing what God has done in your life, is actually starting with great questions. Got something to drink? Imagine at the backyard barbecue in, your backyard. Imagine, you ask a friend, hey, what's going on in your world? Tell me what's happening with the kids. Hey, what was, in the book, I Was Lost, the book that I was talking about earlier, the author says this. They said, learning to ask good questions is at the heart of evangelism in the mold of Jesus. In fact, we see throughout the New Testament, Jesus loved asking questions. In fact, actually, Jesus loved asking questions a lot more than he loved answering questions. In the New Testament, in that part of the Bible that talks about him, Jesus was asked 183 questions, and he only answered 3 of them directly. What's more, that he asked 307 of his own questions back to those questions. In other words, when Jesus was entered into a Q&A session, it was more like a Q&Q session. People would ask him questions, he would turn around and ask questions in return. This is important for us to pick up on. Jesus was more interested in great questions than starting with great answers. He was interested in how do I engage someone else? How do I understand what's happening in their world? Well, let's keep going. Why is that? Because and I know, when you ask a question, relationships begin to open up. When you ask someone else what's going on in their world, you begin to develop a relationship with them. When you just voiced an answer on someone, you actually close down relationship. And Jesus understood that. And we're going to actually see that. Watch what happens here in verse 9. The Samaritan woman said to him, you are a Jew and I am a Samaritan woman. How can you ask me for a drink? For the Jews did not associate with the Samaritans. We talked a little bit about this. This is kind of like, Peter and we live in Northeast for a little bit. It's kind of like the Yankees, Red Sox, or it's really the Yankees and everyone else. Like, everyone hates the Yankees, right? You just don't like them. It's the East Coast, West Coast thing. I was in California last week visiting with Pastor Tom, actually another overseer from church here. And it's like those people on the West Coast, they think they're so special. People on the East Coast, we know we are. Like, come on, people. Like, it's rivals at a whole new level. The Jews here were God's chosen people. And like we said earlier, the Samaritans, they were really looked down upon by the Jews and vice versa. But Jesus actually, by simply asking a question, was building a bridge. And Jesus answered her, if you knew the gift of God and who it was that was asking you for a drink, you would ask him and he would give you living water. Do you see what Jesus did there? Do you see what he did? Jesus started by asking a simple question. Would you like a drink? Would you like a sip? Can I get something to drink? And then he goes to do something next. What does he do? This is the second point. Drill down deeper. Drill down deeper. Now, this is really the second step that we see in the way Jesus talked about faith, the way he's really modeling for you and I to talk about faith, is to move beyond simply the surface conversation and to try to find a path to something deeper that's going on in someone's life. With the Samaritan woman, what Jesus did is he started with a physical need and then pivots to a spiritual reality. He starts with this idea of what was happening, in front of her, which was this idea of getting a drink, and then he pivots and talks about a deeper reality. Now, this is an important thing for us to understand in conversation. Oftentimes, people exhibit surface symptoms, but what's going on there is that points to a deeper need in their life. So when we're in conversation, our first job is to ask a question and to listen to what people are saying, and to think, Lord, and ask the Lord, what is it about this thing that this person's talking about at a surface level that might point to something deeper going on in their life? So, hey, how are things going with the kids? Man, I'm just so tired all the time. Kids they're so tiring. Now that, you could just move on and say, well, have another coffee, and just keep it at surface. But actually, you could drill deeper and say, well, tell me about that. Why is that? Maybe actually the fact that they're tired is masking, something that's going on in their marriage. Maybe things aren't great there. Maybe there's something where Jesus needs to step in. Drill down deeper, and you'll find yourself in some pretty meaningful conversations, even in your backyard. When you're sitting on the lawn, when you're looking to have something grill on the barbecue. Because ultimately, drilling down deeper is about going after the heart. And that's what Jesus is interested about. He's interested in what's going on the inside. Well, we're going to skip down a few verses down to verse 15, and we'll see the conversation continues. The woman said to him, "Sir, give me this water so that I won't get thirsty and have to keep coming back here to draw water." See, she was still stuck at the surface. He was talking about something deeper. He was talking about living water, which is a little bit confusing. But he keeps drilling down deeper. And what does he say? He told her, verse 16, he told her, "Call your husbands and come back." And she says, I have no husband, she replied. And Jesus said to her, "You're right when you said that you have no husband. In fact, you have had 5 husbands. The man you are now with is not your husband. What you have said is quite true." Oh, no, he didn't. Oh, yes, he did. Jesus went there. Jesus went to the heart of the issue with this particular woman. See, we live in a culture that is really, stuck on staying at surface, is stuck at saying, how do we stay, just skimming along the surface to never offend. When I was a kid, they said, don't talk about politics, sex, and religion. Don't go there. We're not going to talk about it. And Jesus, he went there. And this actually brings us to the third step, and that Jesus seems to be modeled here, and that is to go there, to actually go there, to ask the question, to lean in. He said, it's right that you have no husband. In fact, you have had 5 husbands, and the man you're with is not your current, he's not your husband. Is it possible that there's maybe something going on in your life? Is there an emptiness inside of you that you keep trying to hide? You see, did you recall this tiny detail about this passage? There's a small detail that we ran over earlier. And in fact, Jesus was there at 12 noon. Remember we mentioned this earlier? Now in the Middle East, it's the hottest part of the day. It's the hottest part of the day. And in that culture, women only went to get water at 2 times of the day, either very first thing in the morning, 6 a.m., just as the sun comes up, or at the very end of the day. In fact, in a lot of parts of the developing world, this is still the case. And you know that makes intuitive sense. You don't go dragging water back to your town when, it's so hot out. But this woman, she was coming in the middle of the day. Why is that? It would be like saying, in today's day, it was like they went to the 24-hour Walmart at 1 a.m. to go shopping. Who goes shopping at 1 a.m.? Well, maybe it's people who are trying to avoid talking to other folks. They're just looking for some quietness in their life. This woman, I think that detail is in there because there was a certain amount of shame in her life around what was going on. This 5-6 guys that had been in her life, in and out of her life. In fact, I can imagine very easily that she just didn't want to put up with the hassle of seeing other people who would bring shame upon her. And so she found herself there in the middle of the day to have this incredible encounter with Christ. It's like he's saying to her, I understand why you're here. I understand why you came at the middle of the day. I understand why you're avoiding seeing other people. Could it be that you're drawing water from the wrong well? Could it be that you're looking for something in your life through these men that is not going to fulfill the desire that you have in the deepest part of your world? Jesus goes after her heart in just a few words. He doesn't go after her about politics. He doesn't even shame her. And he's not calling her a pagan. He's going after her heart. He's asking, what is going on inside? Now, for you and I, this is the hardest part about trying to see people for how God sees them, to see the amazing love that God has for them, and to go after their heart. The woman at the well tries to change the topic in verse 19 and says, Sir, the woman said, I can see that you're a prophet. Our fathers worshipped on this mountain, but Jews claim that this place must be a place of worship in Jerusalem. Now don't miss this, because this to me seems like such a human interaction. This part of the passage, I don't know if you've had this happen, where maybe you're having an interaction with someone, you're talking about something, and then they try to change the subject. Actually, what she was trying to do here, Jesus was talking personally. She was getting into religious, even political situations. She was kind of trying to pick a fight with him. She was like, but you Jews claim that this is the place, the only place you should worship is in Jerusalem, which was actually the core issue between Jews and Samaritans. He was trying to go personal. She was trying to go religious or political on you. And I've had this happen as a pastor, where people find out. I always a little bit when people say, "What do you do?" At that moment, I'm always like, what do I say? And because so many conversations I've been in, and people say, I say, I'm a pastor, or I work with church leaders, or that kind of thing. And it's like, people are uncomfortable with that, and it's like they want to get political. They'll say, like, well, what's your views on gay marriage? It's like, okay, well, we're going to go there. This is the first thing you want to talk about? Like, how about, something more surfacey? But the reason why people do that is because they're trying to push back the conversation. They're like, I don't want to talk about personal things. I don't want to talk about that. I'd rather to get into a debate. And this is the next point: avoid debate. Jesus doesn't get into the conversation about where we're supposed to worship. Jesus doesn't get into this political, are we supposed to worship here? Are we supposed to worship in Jerusalem? It's almost like he ignores it. He goes beyond it. We want, people love to debate religion. They love to debate politics. They love to debate all of that. But when we go there, when we go to people's heart, we need to avoid debate. We need to avoid the traps that people try to set, which ultimately pushes the conversation into some surface area, and to stay focused on what is it that Jesus wants to say to this person? What is it that he is interested? In fact, we keep going down a little bit further. We see in verse 21, Jesus declared, "Believe me, woman, the time is coming when you will worship the Father neither on this mountain or in Jerusalem." Then skip down to verse 25. The woman said, I know that the Messiah called Christ is coming. When he comes, he will explain everything to us. Great irony in that moment. In other words, I believe in God. I know that I've made mistakes. And when God reveals himself, I'll believe. She's already taking steps towards Christ. And this is my favorite part. This next verse, verse 26, is my favorite part of this entire passage. What does it say? Verse 26 says, Then Jesus declared, I who speak to you am he. See, folks, Jesus is closer in our conversations than we think. Jesus is the pathway is there if we simply lean in. In fact, this brings us to the last point. This is our fifth and final step, which is to reveal Christ. I know it sounds obvious, but I mean, we're talking about evangelism. We're talking about how do we tell others about Jesus in our lives? How do we talk about, we're going to get into this. Next week, Pastor Justin's got this killer message lined up where he's going to give you all kinds of practical ways to work through. What does it mean to talk about Jesus? And then the final week, Pastor Peter will be back to really help close out the session and give us some and even more framework around how do we ultimately open up conversation to the point where we can point people to Christ. But ultimately, this is where conversations, we need to be asking Jesus to help us guide our conversations to him, to reveal what he has done. Not what we've done. Not what we believe on some side issues, some side political or even religious issues, but ultimately about him. So today what I want to do is I want to encourage you to think about one person in your life. This is what I want you to do. For a moment, I want you to be thinking about one person in your life who you would love to come to know Jesus. And what I want you to be thinking about is actually, if you've got a pen, I would love you to take out your program or what we gave you this morning. And I want you to be thinking about one individual. In the coming weeks, and we're going to pray in a moment, that God will give you an opportunity. There will be an open door, some sort of open situation where literally it will go from, hey, can I get you a drink, or can I have a drink? And ultimately that will lead all the way to revealing a conversation about Jesus in your life. And we're going to pray this morning for that one person in your life. And maybe even today, as we've been talking and thinking here, that person's name has come to your mind. Maybe as we've talked about, what does it mean to tell others about Jesus? That person has jumped to your mind. And I think that's the Spirit at work in you. I think that's God lining up and saying, hey, I would love to steer you in a way in front of a conversation with that person to ultimately point people back to Jesus. I don't think that's a coincidence that name has come in to your mind. And so what I'd love for you to do is, rather than just let that pass by and say like, oh, that must have been thinking about them because I'm going to see them this week. Rather than letting that pass by, I'd love for you to write even their initials on the piece of paper that we gave you here today. Because I think writing that down is almost like committing in your heart, Lord, help me to see in the conversations that I'll have in the coming weeks what I could do to see that conversation ultimately reveal Christ. And in the coming weeks, we're going to be praying for those people and then ultimately hoping that you'll get an opportunity to talk about the amazing things that God has done in your life. One other thing. We all know that our backyards have expanded. In fact, they've become, our kind of social circles are much bigger than, say, my parents. My parents used to have people over in their backyard, and that was really they used to play euchre. Are there any euchre players here? My parents, when they were kids, or when I was a kid, they would have friends over. There was euchre night at our house, and they would sit there, and it'd be them and another couple, and they would play euchre, and that was like a big deal. Like, those were my parents' friends, and actually to this day, they still are friends with the people they used to play euchre with. But you and I, our social circles have expanded significantly. In fact, we have this whole digital backyard, which we call social media. It's a place for us to connect with people on a regular basis. And so actually, what I want us to do is actually take out our phones, and we're going to try something. Now, I know you have your phone with you, so I want everyone, I took it out, no one took it out. What I want you to do is actually take out your phone in church, because I want to show you something amazing on here. On your phone, you have an app called Facebook. I know you do. And what I want you to do is I want you to search for our church, Hope City Church SRQ. And on there, You might wonder, you're like, man, they publish a lot of things here at this church. They're always doing different things. They're like, Pastor Peter's doing like some Facebook Live stuff. And you're like, that's really interesting that they do that. But you know why the church does that? You know why we generate all that? So that you can tell your friends in a way about what's happening in your life spiritually. And actually, by liking, commenting, and sharing, that can be as simple as saying, hey, would you like a drink? It's as simple as starting a conversation online. And so actually today, the church released a video of the song, My Hope, the original song that we just love here at the church. I think it's an incredible song. And God's used this song in our church, and we want to spread that song. And we think that there could be a conversation starter in your life. So what I'm asking you to do right now is to like, comment, and share on that post. And so if you see here, it's literally, you find Hope City SRQ, you scroll down, and you can see every Sunday, and there's a video there. And what I want you to do is to like on it, or comment, or share it. And what we think is every time you do that, it's like starting a conversation online with your friends. People will be like, oh, what's happening there? What's going on in your life? I'd love to know more about that. And that's one way, one simple way that you can start conversations with that person that we're thinking about, with that person who we're hoping in the coming weeks you'll get a chance to talk to them about what God's done in your life. So as you do that, I'm going to give you 10 seconds right now. I'm just going to stand and stare at you to do that. We're actually doing it right now in church. And isn't that crazy? You're taking your phone out and doing that. And I can see people doing it. Look at that. It's very nice. You're all very obedient people. That's very good of you. Must have a good pastor. Well, let's pray. And we're going to pray for the person that you've been thinking about, who God's put that name on your heart today. So let's pray.